Hello, everyone, and very good evening to all of you. I'm so sorry, me and our good friend from the tech team were essentially struggling in terms of trying to figure out why the color behind me is not displaying as green, while the green screen is actually pretty much in place. But well, I mean, after all that struggle, now that this is not working out for the time being, we might as well get started because the more important priority, of course, is that we have to try and understand what is the concept of vicarious liability, particularly certain uh, complications, not just in the context of the overall idea of tort law, but rather also from a more clat perspective that I wanted to take you through this particular issue. Hello, Nimisha, Shivang, Tanvi, Khushi, Sejal, Shrestha, Sanchari, Yatish. Very good to see all of you. Very lovely. Good evening to all of the good folks. Right. Without wasting too much time, I'll just take about a few seconds to quickly introduce myself. As you can see, my name is Devajyoti Das, and I'm also a graduate from law school, and also secured an already rank 20 in the NLS Bangalore entrance way back in 2006. It's been such a long time, no? Okay, without further complications. Now, the concept of tort law is more like a proxy liability situation, right? Now, what's the idea of this proxy liability? Generally, we have plaintiff, right, and we have defendant. Generally, ये दो लोग होते हैं. And the plaintiff is the person who is filing a particular case, and of course, the case is being filed because somebody has done something wrong. Now, who has done something wrong? It is basically the defendant, जिसने कुछ ना कुछ गलत किया है, और डिफेंडेंट की गलती की वजह से, ड्यू टू द फॉल्ट ऑफ द डिफेंडेंट, there is a certain damage that the plaintiff has suffered, right? So defendant ने गलत किया और plaintiff को कुछ ना कुछ damage हुआ. Most of the torts यही concept हमें apply करना होता है. Most of the torts में we have from negligence to trespass to nuisance, इस टाइप के जो भी हैं वो सारे सिचुएशन में घूम फिर के होता है यही. However, उसमें there are some exceptions, right? For example, we have strict and absolute liability. Strict and absolute liability are no fault liability torts. Why I'm saying no fault liability torts? Because बिना किसी गलती के भी, without any fault also, it is possible that we are going to hold somebody responsible. Right? Strict liability is not about fault, it is more about responsibility. जिम्मेदारी आपकी है, because you have a very dangerous thing on your property and this dangerous thing is escaping and it is causing damage and so on. So there are certain conditions जिसमें liability हो सकती है. Vicarious liability is a little more interesting even, because vicarious liability में क्या हो रहा है? Basically the question is, can you be held liable for someone else's actions, right? For someone else's actions, can you be held liable? Again, the answer here is also yes. And the only concept or the only idea जिसमें हम किसी और के actions के लिए liable हो सकते हैं, that idea is the concept of vicarious liability. Right? Now, vicarious liability is basically broadly, if you look at it, it's broadly of two types. Right? We have master-servant relationship and we have principal-agent relationship. Broadly, दो type के हमारे vicarious liability के situations होते हैं. Okay, formatting issues, थोड़े से formatting issues भी आ चुके हैं यहाँ पर. I'm just gonna drag this back. Should be much better. Okay, that I assume is enough for you guys to be able to read it out, right? So master servant and प्रिंसिपल एजेंट रिलेशनशिप्स. मास्टर सर्वेंट रिलेशनशिप ऑफ कोर्स इज द मोर पॉपुलर एरिया, जिसमें से आपके अधिकतर क्वेश्चंस जो आते हैं, मोस्ट ऑफ द क्वेश्चंस दैट यू विल यूजुअली गेट will be from the concept of master servant relationship, right? Now there are broadly two tests, right? Mainly two tests to determine whether there exists a master servant relationship in the first place, right? Now what are these two tests? The two tests to determine are, first of all, the hire and fire test. हायर एंड फायर टेस्ट एक है, और एक क्या है, सुपरविजन एंड कंट्रोल टेस्ट, राइट? सो वी हैव द हायर एंड फायर टेस्ट एंड वी हैव द सुपरविजन and control test. So supervision and control test and hire and fire test. Hire and fire, please remember, is generally applicable to all kinds of situations, right? All kinds of situations. Basically, where one person is in a position to offer employment, right, to another person, and is also in a position to remove that person from employment. So नौकरी पे रख भी सकते हैं and नौकरी से हटा भी सकते हैं, right? अगर ये दोनों चीजें कहीं पर भी हो रही हैं, right? In that case, we have both hiring rights as well as we have firing rights. Whoever is the master basically has both hiring rights and has firing rights. And अगर hire and fire दोनों जिसके भी पास है, वो पर्सन बेसिकली मास्टर के डेफिनेशन में आएगा. Supervision and control is a little more complicated. It's a slightly more tricky proposition because supervision and control test is applicable only when there is a low skill employment. लिखा ही है, it is indirectly proportional to the skill involved in the employment. मतलब जितना जितना हाई स्किल एम्प्लॉयमेंट पे आप जाएंगे, राइट, जितना ज्यादा हाई स्किल एम्प्लॉयमेंट पे जाएंगे उतना कम सुपरविजन एंड कंट्रोल होता जाएगा, और जितना लो स्किल में जाएंगे उतना ज्यादा सुपरविजन एंड कंट्रोल होता जाएगा. फॉर एग्जांपल, when you're looking at let's say domestic help, right, domestic cook, या डोमेस्टिक ड्राइवर, क्योंकि 5 स्टार का शेफ और फॉर्मूला 1 का ड्राइवर तो चलो हाई स्किल एम्प्लॉयमेंट हो गया, राइट? बट घर पे लोकल देयर इज अ ड्राइवर, देयर इज अ कुक, एटसेट्रा. When you're looking at these kind of low skill employment, there is a certain degree of supervision and control, which means that if there are people coming over for dinner, मान लो आपके घर पे लोग आ रहे हैं, तो obviously आप अपने कुक को बताओगे what kind of food you want to eat. If you're in a hurry and you want to reach the airport because you have a flight to catch, etc., of course you will tell your driver to drive just a little bit faster. So again, there is a certain degree of supervision and control. Supervision and control is not like कि पूरा specific आपको कि कौन से गियर पे गाड़ी चलाना है वो आप अपने ड्राइवर को बता रहे हैं, या अभी प्याज डालो फिर लहसुन डालो फिर सरसों का तेल में बनेगा आज. ये इतना स्पेसिफिक की बात नहीं है, but you're having a general overview or a more broader kind of guideline, instruction, etc. that you're giving to another person. But if you go to high skill employment, like जब हम देखते हैं कि एक सर्जन है in a hospital, right? Of course, nobody is going to tell the surgeon in a hospital how to perform a particular surgery. नहीं, कार्डियो सर्जरी हो रहा है, उसमें हार्ट ट्रांसप्लांट करना है, उसमें सर्जन को जाके कोई थोड़ी बता रहा है कि कैसे सर्जरी करना है. उसने बहुत सारी पढ़ाई की है, बहुत सारा प्रैक्टिस किया है, एंड दैट इज व्हाई दैट पर्सन है. थोड़ा साइड से काट के देख लो, थोड़ा ऊपर काट के देख लो, इस टाइप का इंस्ट्रक्शन कोई सर्जन को नहीं दे रहा होता है, राइट? सो हाई स्किल एम्प्लॉयमेंट, लो सुपरविजन एंड कंट्रोल, ऑलमोस्ट जीरो सुपरविजन एंड कंट्रोल. बट व्हेन यू गो टू लो स्किल एम्प्लॉयमेंट, देन सुपरविजन एंड कंट्रोल कभी कभी अप्लाई किया जाता है. बट एनीवे, हायर एंड फायर अगर है, whoever can hire and whoever can fire, that person is basically the master. जिसके भी पास hiring rights भी है and firing rights भी है, that person. Okay. Sorry, I was not looking at the chat box too much. Hasika, like Bhopal gas tragedy. Yes, I assume you're talking about strict and absolute liability. Very good evening, Shashwat, Vedant. Okay, Shivecha Singh has, sir, how to figure out difference between principal agent and independent contractor situations? Um, okay, that's a very important question, which all of you should definitely understand. The main difference between say master servant and principal agent ho compared to independent contractor, right? Compared to independent contractor, the main difference is the independent contractor is not joining as an employee. वो आपका काम जरूर कर रहा है. For example, if I hire a taxi driver, right, from a particular company, like tomorrow I have to go to Kanpur. Okay, I have an offline class in Kanpur and I live in Lucknow. So now Clat Possible has hired a particular taxi company. वहीं से taxi आती है, फिर हम लोग जाते हैं and all that. So tomorrow also the taxi person is going to come to my place, right? Now of course Clat Possible is making the payment. वो driver का भी कुछ ना कुछ उसमें से share होगा, कुछ होगा. But वो जो driver कल आएगा, that driver is not an employee of Clat Possible, right? That driver is an employee of the taxi company. Taxi company is an independent contractor जिसको हमने hire किया है, Clat Possible ने hire किया है, ताकि वो हमारे faculty members को and tomorrow specifically मुझे जाके वहां पर कानपुर में छोड़ के फिर वापस भी लेके आएगा and all that. So, for example, similarly, if you're looking at lawyers, right? All of us are talking about lawyers and law students at the end of the day. If you're looking at it, say, from a lawyer's perspective also, again, the thing is that if you hire Harish Salve to represent you in a particular matter, you are not really hiring that person as an employee, right? So वो employment के structure में आपको join ही नहीं कर रहा ना. You are going to pay that person for the particular case that the person is representing you in. Number of appearances कितने हैं, conferences कितने attend करने पड़ेंगे, मतलब client के साथ meeting कितनी करनी पड़ेगी, paper work कितना करना पड़ेगा. उस specific action के हिसाब से you are finalizing the amount of money that has to be paid. But हरीश साल्वे आपके यहाँ नौकरी नहीं कर रहा है, right? So always try to look for whether there is an employment relationship or not, right? Hiring for a particular service, right? And hiring of a particular person for service and contract of service. वो कॉन्ट्रैक्ट लॉ में भी थोड़ा बहुत डिटेल में शायद आप लोगों ने पढ़ा भी हो, राइट? नहीं तो हमारे क्लासेस में तो जो हमारे एटलीस्ट जो क्रैश कोर्स है, जो हमारा ऑनलाइन का दैट इज द बोल्ड कोर्स और द ब्रीज और द ज़ेफायर, ये सारे जो बैचेस हैं, इसमें तो कॉन्ट्रैक्ट लॉ में भी मैं आपको डेफिनेटली डिस्कस करूंगा अभी. व्हाट इज द डिफरेंस बिटवीन कॉन्ट्रैक्ट ऑफ सर्विस and contract for service. That's essentially how you differentiate between whether somebody is your employee or somebody is not your employee but rather an independent contractor, right? So hire and fire test वही basically apply करते रहो. नौकरी करने के लिए रखा है किसी को आपने या एक particular काम करने के लिए रखा है, उतने में से अपने आप समझ में आ जाएगा whether somebody is a servant or an independent contractor, right? So I hope that kind of makes sense. Kavya, so how to differentiate whether the servant has done an authorized act in an unauthorized manner or he has done an unauthorized act altogether? आ रहे Kavya, उस पे तो आ ही रहे हैं. Vedant also has a question. Direction control can't be used with independent contractor unlike servant or employee. Can we remember like? I mean, it is also something that you can remember, Vedant. उसमें problem नहीं है, उसमें कुछ गलत नहीं है. बट डायरेक्शन एंड कंट्रोल एम्प्लॉय के केस में भी मैं बताता रहा हूं कि जब हाई स्किल एम्प्लॉयमेंट होगा तो सुपरविजन एंड कंट्रोल डज नॉट अप्लाई, राइट? इट डज नॉट अप्लाई टू हाई स्किल, राइट? जैसे अब सर्जन के केस में भी तो सुपरविजन एंड कंट्रोल अप्लाई हो नहीं पा रहा है, राइट? नोबडी इज टेलिंग द सर्जन हाउ टू परफॉर्म द सर्जरी एंड सो ऑन. सो जब हाई स्किल एम्प्लॉयमेंट और इंडिपेंडेंट कॉन्ट्रैक्टर को कंपेयर करोगे तो सुपरविजन एंड कंट्रोल में दोनों में एब्सेंट हो जाएगा. सो वो डिफरेंशिएट करना फिर मुश्किल हो जाता है. दैट इज व्हाई द मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट टेस्ट दैट यू शुड ऑलवेज रिमेंबर इज डेफिनेटली द हायर एंड फायर टेस्ट एंड द कॉन्ट्रैक्ट ऑफ सर्विस फॉर सर्विस, और वो सब जो डिफरेंस है It's a more guaranteed kind of approach. It's a more sure shot kind of approach. You are very unlikely to go wrong with that approach, right? Okay, how to differentiate between authorized act, unauthorized act, and so on. Please remember, of course, master is not liable for all acts of the servant. Of course, the master is not liable for all acts of the servant, but rather the master is liable only for those acts of the servant which are within the course of employment, right? Within the course of employment hona padega. So within the course of employment we have authorized act and we have acts which are related to the authorized act, right? Now what are authorized acts? Authorized acts are basically the core function, the main function, whether usko rightly kiya gaya hai ya wrongly kiya gaya, उससे कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता. Whatever, if as long as the person is performing the main function. So let's say for a driver, the main function is what? It is driving, right? The core function, the main function itself is driving. Now, as long as the person is driving, whether the person is drunk and driving, या normally गाड़ी चला रहा था फिर negligence की वजह से accident हो गया, it really will not make any difference, right? It will really not make any difference because one is going to be authorized act done wrongly अगर वो drunk and driving कर रहा है, and the other will be authorized act done rightly अगर वो drunk नहीं है, कुछ नहीं है, ऐसा problem नहीं है, लेकिन ultimately negligence हुआ तो liability तो आएगी, right? Similarly, acts which are related to authorized act is anything that is essential, necessary होना चाहिए, essential होना चाहिए to do the authorized act. So अगर, for example, now if I have an offline class in Kanpur tomorrow, of course offline class, so that means I have to physically go to Kanpur. So मेरा main function क्या है, core function क्या है? What is the authorized act? Providing educational services, right? Providing academic services. That's the main function. A related function जो essential है, वो essential चीज क्या है कि मुझे यहाँ से कानपुर जाना पड़ेगा तभी तो मैं कानपुर में क्लास ले पाऊंगा. So this going from home to Kanpur and coming back from Kanpur back to my home, ये दोनों चीजें जो हैं, ये दोनों चीजें आएंगी हमारे related to authorized act function में. अब related to authorized act भी rightly हो, wrongly हो, जो भी हो, like smoking at the petrol pump. अब filling up fuel is related to authorized act. Smoking at the petrol pump is a wrong way of filling up petrol. तो वो भी ultimately within the course of employment ही आता है. Ultimately वो within the course of employment ही आता है. But the moment, right? The moment all of this goes beyond, इन चारों में से कुछ भी अगर नहीं होगा, authorized act done rightly, authorized act done wrongly, related to authorized act done rightly, related to authorized act done wrongly, इन चारों को छोड़ के कुछ भी होगा, that is unauthorized act. So unauthorized act का कोई definition नहीं है, right? There is no definition for unauthorized act. डेफिनेशन आप इन चारों का याद रखिए, कोर फंक्शन कर रहा है कि नहीं, रिलेटेड फंक्शन कर रहा है कि नहीं, सही से करे, गलत से करे, कैसे भी करे. The moment you go beyond these, it becomes an unauthorized act, right? It becomes an unauthorized act. Okay. A few questions on the chat box. Aishwarya Dhawan has a question, but however, in some questions, like an employee was working in the industry and working there, but in break he lit up his cigarette and thrown it inside, only in fire outbreak happened. But here he did it without any care. It was also to keep us safe in employment. Anyhow, he was not in the course of employment, or how he was an employee. Yeah, I mean, of course, if an employee separately goes and commits murder वगैरह तो वो तो उसका related function में नहीं आएगा ना. That's an independent criminal activity. That's an independent criminal activity for which the master is not responsible. वो unauthorized act में चला गया. Sir, I read that agent Shivecha has another question. Sir, I read that an agent can enter into contracts on behalf of the principal, but I think servant can also enter into contracts like while bringing groceries and stuff. Yeah, I mean, if it is part of the either authorized act और related to authorized act, अगर इन दोनों में से किसी एक का part है, तब servant is obviously authorized. So for example, when it comes to cook, to answer your particular question, अगर cook की हम बात कर रहे हैं, तो of course the cook can be in most of the situations the cook is also probably authorized to go and get food. या ड्राइवर पेट्रोल भरवाने जा रहा है, तो वो पेट्रोल पंप पे जो इम्प्लाइड कॉन्ट्रैक्ट और ये सब हो रहा है कि पैसे मैं दूंगा, पेट्रोल आप देंगे और ये वो, it is of course the driver is doing that on behalf of the master, and it's an essential part of driving because without fuel you cannot drive. तो वो टाइप के implied contractual powers as long as authorized act में है या related to authorized act में है, तब तक वो बिल्कुल valid and authorized to do the contracts on behalf of the master माना जाएगा, right? Vrinda also has a question. Sir, if servant tells someone else to perform his duty, then also master will be liable, right? Yes. Whether it is a justified delegation or it is an illegal or whatever unlawful delegation, right? Wrongful delegation, वो दोनों में basically authorized act done wrongly में हो जाएगा ना, when you are doing it through somebody who is not authorized to do it. Like बस ड्राइवर ने अगर खुद ही ऑथराइज किया अपने दोस्त को गाड़ी चलाने के लिए, तो wrongful delegation of authority जरूर है, but liability तो master की होगी. But here master will not be liable because it was on a large scale. I mean, industry has hired him from the master, and though he was not in the course, however, he is employed. Yeah, so in this case, जो वो फैक्ट्री में सिगरेट पीने वाला, उसमें वो खुद ही अकेले गलत होगा. That's the idea. No, at the industry situation, master will not be liable. No. If a master appoints both driver and a conductor, and while driver go to drink water and conductor in order to eliminate a collision of but Nimisha, how does that work? Driver था, conductor था, in order to eliminate a collision of a car heading towards the bus in high speed. मतलब while driving the bus, driver went and started drinking water. ये कैसे होगा? Steering wheel छोड़ के? नहीं, अच्छा, normally रुके हुए थे वो और एक कार आ रहा था. See, if it's an emergency situation, the conductor is also authorized to drive. If it is an emergency situation, like if you're trying to avoid an accident, या नक्सल का अटैक हो गया, ड्राइवर को गोली लग गई है, तो अब वो गाड़ी चला रहा है, अगेन बिकॉज ऑफ एन इमरजेंसी काइंड ऑफ सिचुएशन. तो इन सारे सिचुएशन में बिल्कुल you're kind of authorized to drive. Implied authority है, right? Implied authority. Sir, in Kasturilal, earlier Jain versus State of Uttar Pradesh, Jain stated that even though there was negligence, they will not be held liable. However, what is the context? How some omnibus belonging to Rishi was stolen from the house, later recovered by the police and locked at the police station. I thought that was Prakash in judgment, no? Could be Kasturilal actually, maybe. उसमें जो search and seizure है वो तो sovereign function की वजह से, that's a completely different issue. Yeah, but sir, if principle only states normal course of employment, so this is normal course of employment का क्या है? Authorized act है घूम फिर के. How do you determine what is course of employment? उसी का तो test अभी जो आपको slide में दिख रहा है, वो test ही वही है ना? How do you determine what is course of employment? Normal course of employment also. So you are impliedly authorized in an emergency by default, right? Can the state be liable for the loss of ornaments? In this question, the answer state to the police will be held liable. So why the distinction? I mean, because in this case, probably they were not performing authorized act, no? अरे sovereign function, no? So vicarious liability of the state अलग से होता है. ये सारी चीजें हम थोड़ा ज्यादा डिटेल में हमारे सेशंस में डिस्कस कर पाते हैं. So you have to distinguish it from the other case जिसमें I think that was प्रकाश सिंह केस, जिसमें कस्टम ऑफिसर्स ने कुछ गोल्ड सीज किया था, which is obviously a sovereign function because seizing by the custom authorities is something that nobody else is allowed to do, only the government or the government's agencies are allowed to do. तो वो वाला जो कस्टम में सीज किया हुआ गोल्ड था, वो जब पुलिस कस्टडी में रखा गया था, that is different from any kind of unlawful सीजर और व्हाटएवर, तो पुलिस लायबल हो सकती है, राइट? या इंडिविजुअली जिसने चोरी करके भाग गया, कुछ हो गया, वो तो अलग बात है, राइट? अब इस केस में एग्जैक्टली हुआ क्या मैं समझ नहीं पा रहा हूँ। उस केस में तो यही हुआ था कि कांस्टेबल खुद ही चोरी करके भाग गया था, बट इट वाज डीम्ड टू बी फेलियर ड्यूरिंग द कोर्स ऑफ परफॉर्मिंग अ सॉवरेन फंक्शन, जब कस्टम वाला इन्वॉल्व था, एंड देयरफॉर द स्टेट वाज हेल्ड टू बी नॉट लायबल। अब इस केस में एग्जैक्टली हुआ क्या है, आई हैव टू चेक probably. So maybe next time when we meet, we can take a quick look at it, right? So anyway, many more examples, guys. Many more examples. वाइकेरियस लाइबिलिटी के बहुत सारे प्रैक्टिस शीट्स वगैरह, ये सब कुछ हम हमारे क्लासेस में इसको कंटिन्यू डेफिनेटली करेंगे. I think from the 25th of May, we're starting off with another online batch as well. And of course, those of you who have access to our offline centers, please do feel free to drop by anytime. We have a lot of doubt sessions that we keep conducting as well. And of course, we'll keep continuing at least an overview or a brief discussion on various important topics when we keep meeting on YouTube as well. Right, guys, thank you very much. I assume all of you are looking forward to a wonderful weekend ahead of you. So have a lovely weekend. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great night. Bye bye.